The winter of 1888 fell upon the Wyoming Territory like a shroud, and for Mai Lin, a young Chinese widow in a rough railroad town, the approaching Christmas Eve promised no joy, only a final, desperate choice. Her husband, a kind man who had promised her a new start in America, had been taken by a fever that swept through the crowded tenements, leaving her with his debts and the crushing weight of solitude in a land that saw her as little more than a shadow. She was 21, her hands raw from laundry work, her heart a frozen stone in her chest. A life for a woman alone, especially a Chinese woman, was a perilous one. The town's elder, a man named Mr. Chen, approached her one evening in the dim light of his shop, a letter in his hand. "There is a way," he said, his voice heavy. "A rancher, a white man in the high country. He seeks a wife. He is a hard man, they say, but honest. He has a great deal of land and needs a woman to manage the household. He will pay your husband's debts." Mai Lin stared at the English words written in a rough, strong hand. "Arthur Thorne of Stone Creek Ranch seeks a practical wife of good character. Must be resilient and unafraid of hard work and solitude." The name sounded as stark and unforgiving as the mountains on the horizon. A new life or a new kind of prison? She had little choice. She wrote back a simple, formal letter of acceptance. A week later, a train ticket and a small pouch of money arrived. On the morning of Christmas Eve, she stood at the station with a single wooden trunk containing her few possessions. The train whistle cut through the frigid air, a mournful cry that echoed the sorrow in her heart. The journey was cold and long. Each mile carried her further from the familiar, into a world of endless white. Other passengers eyed her with a mixture of pity and suspicion, a lone Chinese woman traveling into the heart of a forbidding wilderness. When the train shuddered to a halt at Stone Creek Station, the town was little more than a handful of snow-dusted buildings huddled against the wind. A man in a heavy coat and a sheriff's badge stepped forward. "You'd be the woman for Arthur Thorne?" he asked, his breath misting in the air. "I am," Mai Lin replied, her voice quiet but steady. The sheriff shifted on his feet, his gaze uneasy. "Thorne's a decent man, far as I know. But he keeps to himself. It's a hard life out at his ranch. I hope you know what you're getting into." A large sleigh waited beyond the station, drawn by two powerful horses. The man holding the reins was Arthur Thorne himself. He was taller than she'd imagined, broad-shouldered and weathered by the sun and wind. A thick, dark beard dusted with snow covered a strong jaw, and his eyes, the color of a winter sky, held no welcome. He simply nodded, took her trunk, and motioned for her to climb aboard. They rode in silence, the only sounds the jingle of the harness and the crunch of snow under the runners. The town vanished behind them, replaced by a vast, silent landscape of snow-covered plains and distant, jagged peaks. By the time the sun began to set, casting a pale pink glow on the snow, she saw the ranch, a sturdy log house and a massive barn, lights glowing warmly in the windows against the encroaching dusk. He helped her down, his touch brief and impersonal. "The sheriff is waiting inside. He'll serve as witness." The ceremony was as stark as the winter landscape. Standing before the hearth of a great stone fireplace, Mai Lin and Arthur Thorne exchanged vows in front of the sheriff. The words felt hollow, a business transaction sealed on the holiest of nights. When it was over, the sheriff wished them a Merry Christmas and departed, leaving them alone in the vast silence of the house. Arthur cleared his throat, not meeting her eyes. "Your room is at the top of the stairs. I'll sleep in the study for now." He then held out a small, locked wooden box, simply carved and bound with iron. "This is for you. A wedding gift." She took the box, surprised by its weight. "What is it?" His gaze finally met hers, and for a fleeting moment, she saw not coldness, but a deep, unreadable sorrow. "Open it only when you feel your heart is ready. When you need to make a choice." He turned away then, leaving her with the crackling fire, the howling wind, and a gift that held a silent, unnerving promise. The days that followed her Christmas Eve wedding were filled with a quiet, demanding routine. Mai Lin rose before dawn, the floorboards cold beneath her feet, and set about her duties. She learned the rhythms of the isolated ranch, the baking of bread, the mending of thick wool blankets, the stoking of the fires that kept the biting cold at bay. Arthur was a ghost in his own home, a man of few words and endless work. He would leave before sunrise to tend to his cattle and return after dark, eating the meals she left for him in silence before retreating to his study. He was not unkind, but he was distant, a fortress of a man walled off from the world. Yet, she saw glimpses of another side to him. He left a pail of hot water by her door each morning and ensured the wood box beside her room's fireplace was always full. They were small courtesies, but in the vast, cold silence of the ranch, they felt like whispers of care. She learned of his past not from his words, but from the land itself. She saw the skill in his hands as he mended a broken fence in a blizzard, the gentleness with which he treated a newborn calf. He was a man who spoke the language of survival, not affection. One afternoon, a week into the new year, a sudden blizzard descended upon the plains. My Lin had gone to the chicken coop to gather eggs, thinking the storm was still a distant threat. But the wind rose with shocking speed, a blinding wall of white that erased the world. Panic seized her as she realized she couldn't see the house, only a few feet away. The cold was a physical thing, stealing the breath from her lungs and numbing her fingers. Lost and terrified, she huddled against the coop, the wind tearing at her shawl. Just as a chilling despair began to set in, a figure emerged from the swirling snow. It was Arthur, his face grim, a lantern held high. Without a word, he swept her into his arms and carried her back to the house. Inside, he set her down before the fire, her body trembling uncontrollably. He stripped off her frozen shawl and boots, chafing her hands and feet until the feeling returned. He worked with a focused intensity, his touch firm and sure, his eyes dark with a concern he could not voice. That night, a fever took hold of her. She drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of cool cloths on her forehead and the steady presence of Arthur sitting in a chair beside her bed. He never left her side, murmuring quiet, soothing words she couldn't quite understand. When the fever finally broke at dawn, she opened her eyes to see him asleep in the chair, his rugged face softened in the pale morning light. For the first time, she saw not just a hard rancher, but a man capable of profound tenderness. In that quiet room, a fragile respect began to bloom between them, unspoken but deeply felt. When she was strong enough to walk again, she found him in the barn, repairing a harness. "Thank you," she said softly. "You saved my life." He stopped his work but didn't look at her. He simply nodded. "You are my wife. It is my duty to protect you." "Was it duty," she asked, her voice gaining strength, "that made you sit by my bed all night?" He finally turned to look at her, and the wall around his eyes seemed to crack, just for a second. "No," he said quietly. "That was not duty." Something shifted between them after the storm. The silence in the house became less heavy, filled with a new awareness. He began to eat his meals with her at the small kitchen table, and sometimes he would speak of the cattle, the changing weather, or the history of the land his father had settled. He told her his first wife had died in childbirth years ago, taking their son with her. The sorrow he carried was the ghost that haunted the ranch, a pain so deep it had frozen his heart. Slowly, without realizing when it started, My Lin stopped feeling like a housekeeper and began to feel like a partner. She learned to read the sky for signs of snow, to track the cattle, and to handle a rifle with surprising accuracy. He, in turn, began to rely on her judgment, asking for her opinion on which bulls to sell or where to move the herd for winter grazing. One evening, as they sat by the fire, he looked at her with a new intensity. "You are stronger than you look, My Lin." She met his gaze, a small smile touching her lips. "And you are kinder than you let the world believe, Arthur Thorne." In that shared look, the foundation of something more than respect was laid. It was a trust forged in hardship and solitude, fragile and precious as the first flower of spring pushing through the snow. And though she still hadn't opened the wooden box he had given her on their wedding night, she no longer feared its contents. She was beginning to understand that some gifts were not meant to be opened, but to be earned. As winter's grip began to loosen, trouble rode in from town. A rival rancher named Henderson, a man known for his greed and cruelty, had long coveted the part of Arthur's land known as Whispering Creek, a sheltered valley with a spring that never froze. Henderson had tried to buy it, then threatened Arthur for it, but Arthur had always refused. Seeing Arthur with a Chinese wife gave Henderson a new weapon, prejudice. When Arthur and Mai Lin rode into town for supplies, they were met with cold stares and hostile whispers. Henderson and his men were gathered outside the general store. "Well, look what we have here," Henderson sneered, blocking their path. Thorn and his mail-order prize, his men laughed. Arthur's hand tightened on the reins of his horse. "Stay out of my way, Henderson." "Or what?" "You'll have your little China doll protect you." Henderson spat on the ground near Mai Lin's feet. "This is a decent town, Thorn. We don't want her kind here." Before Arthur could react, Mai Lin dismounted, her back straight, her expression calm and unyielding. She faced Henderson, her dark eyes flashing. "The decency of a town is measured by how it treats its neighbors, not by the color of their skin," she said, her voice clear and ringing. "My husband is a man of honor who has built his life with his own 2 hands. He has earned his place here." "What, sir, have you ever earned that you did not take by threat or by force?" A stunned silence fell over the street. The townspeople, who had been watching, looked on with a new curiosity. Henderson, red-faced and speechless, was left sputtering as Arthur, a look of profound astonishment and pride on his face, helped Mai Lin back onto her horse. They rode out of town with their heads held high. On the long ride back to the ranch, the silence was different. It was filled with unspoken admiration. "You have a fire in you, Mai Lin," Arthur said finally, his voice rough with emotion. She looked at him, a genuine smile illuminating her face. "It was your strength that gave me the courage to find it." That night, the air in the house was charged. The distance that had separated them for months had vanished, burned away by the fire of her defiance. As they stood before the hearth, Arthur reached out and gently touched her cheek. "I was wrong," he whispered. "I married you for practicality. For duty. I did not know I was marrying a queen." The fear she once felt for this imposing, silent man had long since transformed into something far deeper. Leaning into his touch, she realized she had fallen in love with him. In the quiet solitude of the Wyoming winter, 2 lonely souls had found a home in each other. But their peace was short-lived. A week later, under the cover of a moonless, snowy night, Henderson and his men attacked. Mai Lin awoke to the smell of smoke and the terrified bellowing of cattle. The barn was on fire. Arthur grabbed his rifle. "Stay inside," he yelled, but she was already pulling on her boots. She would not hide while her husband fought alone. Gunshots cracked through the night. Arthur took cover behind a water trough, firing back with deadly accuracy. But he was outnumbered. As Mai Lin ran toward him with more ammunition, a bullet grazed Arthur's shoulder, sending him staggering to the ground. Henderson and 2 of his men closed in on him, kicking his rifle away. "The ranch is mine now, Thorn," Henderson gloated, raising his pistol. Seeing Arthur helpless, a desperate courage surged through Mai Lin. She ran back into the house, not for a weapon, but for the one thing she had left, the wooden box. Her heart pounding, she fumbled with the lock, her fingers cold and clumsy. It wouldn't open. Sobbing with frustration, she remembered his words, "Open it when you need to make a choice." "I choose him," she screamed into the empty house, and with a surge of adrenaline, she smashed the box against the stone hearth. The wood splintered, revealing its contents. It wasn't jewelry or money. It was a legal document. The deed to Whispering Creek, signed and notarized, made out in her name, Mai Lin. Tucked inside was a letter in Arthur's rough script. "Mai Lin, if you are reading this, it means you have felt trapped. This land is now yours. It is your freedom. You can sell it and return to your world, or you can use it to build a life of your own. I will not hold you. I only ask that you remember the man who saw your strength, even when he could not say the words. Yours, Arthur." Tears streamed down her face. This whole time, his gift had not been a mystery, but a promise, an escape. It was the most profound declaration of love he could make, giving her the power to leave him. Clasping the deed, she ran back outside into the fiery chaos. "Henderson," she cried, her voice ringing with authority. She held up the deed. "Stop! This land, Whispering Creek, it's mine." Henderson stared, his face a mask of confusion. "What trick is this?" "It is no trick. The deed is in my name. You are trespassing on my property and assaulting my husband. The sheriff is on his way, and he will see you hang for this." It was a bluff, but her conviction was absolute. Henderson hesitated, his greed warring with his fear of the law. In that moment of uncertainty, Arthur, regaining his senses, lunged forward, tackling Henderson to the ground. The other ranch hands, seeing their leader fall and hearing My Lin's threat of the law, lost their nerve and fled into the night. When the fight was over, Arthur stood, breathing heavily, and looked at My Lin. He saw the shattered box, the deed in her hand, and an understanding passed between them that was deeper than any vow. "You opened it," he said, his voice raw. "I chose you, Arthur," she whispered, tears finally falling freely. "I will always choose you." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against him as the flames of the burning barn cast a flickering glow upon the snow. The winter of 1888, which had begun with a marriage of convenience, had ended with a love forged in fire and ice. Weeks later, when peace had settled back over the plains, the town of Stone Creek was abuzz with the story. The tale of the quiet rancher and his fierce Chinese wife, and of the shocking wedding gift that had saved them both, silenced the gossips and earned the respect of the entire territory. Henderson was arrested, and the townspeople who had once scorned My Lin now tipped their hats in greeting. One evening, as spring began to breathe life back into the land, Arthur gave My Lin another gift. It was a simple silver pendant, hammered into the shape of a wildflower. It was the lock from the box, he explained, his voice soft as he fastened it around her neck. "Because locks are for keeping things shut, and you, my love, have opened my heart." She touched the pendant, her heart swelling. They stood together on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the mountains. The world stretched before them, vast and full of promise. My Lin, the widow from a faraway land, had not been forced into a prison, but led to a destiny. She had come to Wyoming seeking survival and had found a home, a husband, and a love as wild and enduring as the land itself.